Okay, so let's start with the first topic. What is an agent? And to analyze this, let's go back a bit into a module, an AI module. What is an AI module? And these two topics are really controversial right now because there is a huge gray area today in the definitions of what is a module, when it stops being a module and becomes an agent, because there are a lot of modules in the market, the more recent ones that someone may say that they already behave like an agent and so on. So this is a very controversial area, and you guys, if you start seeing videos about it and learning about it, you will see that there is a very gray area on it. So for me, I will give a definition, and I will talk about what in my perspective should be the difference between a module and an agent. Okay, so let's check here some information. So for example, according to IBM, if we check here in this article, an AI model is a program that has been trained on the set of data to recognize certain patterns and make decisions. So a really important point here, and this is common in every module, is that each module was trained on specific data. Okay, so when the developers or the creators of the module, when they are creating the model, that is basically a set of code, of algorithms, neural networks. We can imagine layers and layers of neural networks inside of a module, and they use a lot of data to train those models, so it requires a lot of data. So we can say that a module is basically a program using AI capabilities like neural networks, trained with heavy sets of data to produce a certain result. Now the tricky part here comes with the part of decisions. So a module, normally, if we look into, for example, the initial versions of ChatGPT, so GPT 2 or 3 or 3.5, those modules, they didn't have a lot of tools behind it. They were simply more like chatbots where you talk with them and they would reply to you. And in my opinion, that is a more raw definition of what is a module, because a module first is stateless. So what it means is that when you go to ChatGPT, not right now, but when you go to ChatGPT, initially you would go to him, you would give an input, press enter, he processes and he gives an output. Okay, so it's stateless. So it doesn't mean that ChatGPT has a life on his own, because every time you press enter, an instance of the module is created where you can interact with it, and you give an input, he runs, gives the output, and he dies, or the instance gets killed. So there is no life cycle of a module, okay, or the life cycle is very short. And this is very important to consider, because when you look at it as something that is simply like a sort of a tool where you give an input and he gives you an output based on that, that's it. You can imagine that being very restricted to what we can do with it. It doesn't have sensors, it does not actuate reactively with a certain environment. So basically the module is more like the intelligent part of a system. Okay, so in that way, I do like to compare it with us humans, because in a certain part, this is something that it becomes more easy for me to understand, is to try to compare it to humans. And for me, we can make a sort of an analogy with what you see here. So for me, a module, not in the complete 100% way, but a module represents a bit a brain a stateless brain that is basically the intelligent part of a system. Okay, so you can have different modules. You can have GPT-4 for text. You can have DALI for image, Mistral, DeepSeek. So there are a lot of modules, each one of them with unique characteristics of how they process the information and give the output. Okay, so we can associate a bit of it like the different brains that exists. So most likely my brain, it will be different from Jimmy's brain, John's, even a dog brain or a monkey. So each animal has unique characteristics of a brain. Okay, so we can see the modules a bit like the different brains that exist. So we can have brains more trained for a specific action, brains more trained for another action. We can even have brains trained with more data and brains trained with less data. Okay, we also have this with people. Okay, there are people that have more deep knowledge of certain topics than others. So it's similar here. But a brain, it's just a brain. So we give inputs to a brain, he processes things and he gives outputs, and he does that in a very fast way. Of course, it's a bit different because brain has memory, so the weights inside of it, they do change with the usage. It's not a rigid module, and the modules are not trained unless we on purpose train them. But to simplify, let's consider this. So what is an agent? An agent is when we pick a brain and we put a person on it. Or basically we pick the brain and we put the brain in the person, not the opposite. So when you start having a person instead of just a brain, you start having a concept of an existence. So you start having someone that has a life, that has a name, that exists with purposes, has goals, has a job. So I do like to look at an agent in the same way of a person, because an agent is basically a system, a more complex system that uses a module the same way that a person uses a brain. So it uses the module to be the intelligent part of it, but it also gives additionally more capabilities to act on the environment. It has sensors, it has actuators, it can have memory. Of course, the brain has memory, but in here it's more like a long memory where you connect, for example, with a database to get information. He can go on the internet, so he can navigate to a lot of places. For example, if you search on the internet, there are a lot of videos about it. I do like this one. I'm going to put it. So you can see here that, for example, an agent here has the capability to react upon an environment. So it has sensors. He can delegate tasks. Yeah, this is optional. This is optional depending on the goal we want to give. He can have some autonomy depending on how we define him. He can have memory, and he can also interact with tools. For example, access internet, do web research, call APIs, and for example run code. So this is normally an agent. So it's basically, as we were showing here, it's basically a module with a purpose of living, with ways to interact with the world. Okay, so he has hands, he has eyes, he has a mouth, he has a body, so he can interact with the environment. Okay, so now that we talk about the agents and the modules, and let me also just show you quickly that for example, if we go to AI Agent Foundry, you guys can see here in the module catalog, this is a small list of the amount of modules that exist in the world, and you guys can see here that they have different purposes, right? So their brains are trained for different purposes, for a chat, for image, for I know that there isn't here anyone for film, for classification, and that's it. So there are different brains. Okay, so I think we are ready to go to the next part.